Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world so bright, so sandy, and so stunningly un-air conditioned that your modern sleep-loving self might start sweating before we even begin. You're standing on the eastern bank of the Nile, toes sinking into cool morning silt, while a faint gold light stretches over the horizon like a slow yawn. Palm shadows ripple on the water. Fishermen pull nets with the calm efficiency of people who've never once Googled how to do this. And you're just trying to figure out which direction the Wi-Fi password might be hiding in. Hint, it's nowhere. You probably won't survive this, but we'll take it nice and easy anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the brightness, still adjusting to the fact that you've woken up in ancient Egypt with absolutely none of the survival skills required to function here. The air already feels warm, even though the sun has barely begun its daily climb. The Nile beside you is calm, its surface reflecting a soft shimmer, and for a moment, just one, you think, maybe this won't be so bad. And then a small, suspiciously toothy ripple breaks the water upstream, reminding you that this river occasionally stores crocodiles, like nature's own poorly supervised filing cabinet. Sweet. You take a cautious step back from the edge. Your sandals, or whatever passed for sandals in the few seconds your mind conjured them, are barely more than woven reeds tied together with the hope that they won't explode on your feet. They're surprisingly comfy, but they're also one sneeze away from disintegrating. The faint smell of silt and wet papyrus curls into the air. Villagers have already begun their morning routines. A woman grinding grain, a man repairing a fishing net, children chasing each other with a level of energy that suggests they've never known the addictive power of cartoons. You trudge toward the village, your steps kicking up little clouds of dust. A thin breeze brushes past, carrying warmth even this early. It's kind for now. By midday, you'll probably feel like a croissant shoved too close to an oven coil. Despite the serenity, you're a walking anachronism. You look around, trying to seem casual, hoping no one notices the "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing" glaze in your eyes. The surprisingly refined smell of incense drifts from a nearby home. Egyptians loved their perfumes, a mainstream fact that's helped archaeologists identify entire industries of scented oils and ointments. You breathe in, pretending it's sunscreen, which you very much do not have. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians actually used a mix of natron and local herbs as a kind of protective paste against the sun, but one quirky tidbit insists that some people tried mashed up lupines or fermented plant oils to block the rays. You do not get to verify this because the sun isn't waiting for test results. It's warming your neck right now. A farmer passes you pulling a small donkey laden with baskets. He nods, curious but polite. You nod back, hoping a single nod counts as fluency in Middle Egyptian body language. He keeps walking, probably thinking you're a bit odd, but harmless. You're grateful. If he had stopped to ask questions, you'd have had to invent some kind of, "Oh yes, I'm from the other village over there by the tall reeds" story, which absolutely would not work. People here know everyone and everything, and where everyone's cousin lives, and which family has a pet cat with a tendency to steal fish. In other words, you are painfully conspicuous. You wipe sweat from your forehead, only to realize it's been, 10 minutes? Egypt's sunlight is famous for its intensity. Ancient scribes wrote about its clarity and brightness. Even today, people wonder how they managed to carve stone or paint tomb walls with such detail in this heat. You're wondering how they didn't just lie down and nap until winter. As you move farther into the village, the earthy scent of mud brick houses surrounds you. Their walls are cool to the touch, holding on to nighttime breezes with a kind of loyalty your own body already seems to have abandoned. A small cat darts past. Egyptians adored cats, often keeping them for rodent control and spiritual protection. This one looks like it owns half the kingdom and pays taxes on none of it. You follow a narrow footpath between homes, trying not to stare too intensely at anyone. People wear simple linen clothing, draped and tied with practiced ease. Their skin glows with the telltale sheen of individuals who work under the sun daily and drink plenty of river water. You, meanwhile, are already on track to vaporize like mist. A bead of sweat slides into your eye. The universe is mocking you. A pair of children stop to look at you. One tilts her head as if assessing whether you're a traveler, a lost farmer, or someone who accidentally sleepwalked here. To be fair, all three options feel equally plausible. She holds a small wooden toy, just a simple animal shape carved smooth. An adult calls her away before she can question you, which saves you from attempting to mime, "I'm just sightseeing across time." You shuffle toward the river again, drawn by its coolness. Someone nearby sings while washing pottery, an airy melody that seems timeless. You pause, listening. For a moment, you forget how out of place you are. The rhythm of daily life surrounds you, steady, practical, peaceful. This world moves at a slower pace, but every action has purpose. You feel your breathing ease. The heat sits heavy on your shoulders, but the river breeze lifts the edges of your fraying nerves. Then something rustles beside your foot, a lizard, sunbathing with the confidence of a creature who knows it could outrun you without even trying. You take a small step back. The lizard blinks. You blink. This is a stalemate you're willing to forfeit. You glance again at the villagers, the river, the sandy horizon stretching endlessly beyond. It's beautiful, quiet, almost welcoming, but you also know deep down that one day in this environment would test you in ways no modern grocery store climate control has prepared you for. Energy drinks? None. Cold showers? Not invented. Sunscreen? Unless you count that questionable crocodile dung mixture someone probably experimented with at some point, no thank you. The sun creeps higher, each minute sharpening the shadows and warming the air. You swallow, bracing yourself. This is only the beginning. You take one more look at the Nile's shimmering surface, inhaling its mix of water, mud, and reeds. This place is ancient, alive, and indifferent to your confusion. And you're about to walk straight into its routines. Heat, sand, quirks, rituals, expectations, and all. But for now, take one more slow breath. Let the morning settle around you. Let the soft hush of the river guide your steps. Your journey through the day, and your attempt to survive even a single one of them, is just beginning. You start walking away from the riverbank, and the moment you leave that tiny ribbon of cool air behind, the sun seems to lunge at you like an overeager house cat that has absolutely no understanding of personal space. It isn't even mid-morning yet, but already the light feels sharper, heavier, as if the sky has decided that you should experience the full menu of medium well human. You tug at the edge of your linen wrap. Well, tug might be generous. It's basically a rectangle of ancient fabric pretending to be clothing, and it shifts more like a curtain caught in a mild breeze than anything tailored. You trudge forward, feeling the warmth rising from the ground, like someone placed a giant heating pad under all of Egypt. The air, dry and shimmering, presses against your skin, and you can't help imagining your modern self mumbling, "Where's the SPF 50? And maybe a hat? And maybe 12 bottles of electrolyte water?" Out here, the sun isn't just warm, it's authoritative. It announces itself. It asserts dominance. It wins every argument. You glance back at the villagers, who are somehow completely unbothered. A pair of fishermen haul a papyrus skiff out of the water, their muscles slick with a sheen that suggests they're used to this brightness. A woman balances a basket on her head while shading her eyes with the ease of someone who has spent her entire life making peace with the fact that the sky is basically a giant light bulb. You, meanwhile, are one step away from reenacting a slow-motion desert collapse. As you walk, grains of sand slip into your sandals with unwavering determination. They have the commitment of employees competing for Sand of the Month. The tiny scratching sensation against your skin becomes its own form of irritation, like a mosquito bite that radiates its annoyance in all directions. You wiggle your toes, trying to dislodge the intruders. The sand decides to stay. You let out a breath that might count as your first light joke of the hour, something along the lines of, "Cool, maybe this is exfoliation." A nearby palm tree offers a thread of shade, and you slide into it like a melting popsicle. For a moment, the relief feels heavenly. A soft sigh escapes before you can stop it. Here, gloomily nested under the fronds, you think maybe you found a sustainable survival strategy. Simply remain in this exact patch of shadow until the invention of modern climate control. But the sun shifts, and the shadow shrinks, nudging you onward like a gentle but persistent reminder that shade is not a renewable resource in this part of the world. You continue toward the fields where farmers begin their daily labor. The smell of earth mixes with the faint aroma of cut reeds. Workers bend low, tending to crops that depend on the Nile's predictable flooding, a mainstream fact you recall from some long-ago documentary you watched half asleep. Egypt's entire agricultural rhythm hinges on the river's rise and retreat. And here you are, sweating profusely, appreciating irrigation systems more than you ever thought possible. A farmer waves you over, curious but friendly. You approach, grateful for the social interaction, until you realize he's gesturing toward a large clay jar of water and pointing at your flushed face with a kind of amused pity. You nod, accepting the silent assessment that you look like a traveler moments away from spontaneous evaporation. The water tastes clean but warm, somehow both refreshing and slightly disappointing, like drinking tea you forgot was tea. Still, it helps. For a few seconds, your brain registers that maybe you won't pass out. Then the sun catches your neck again. The farmer laughs lightly, mutters something that sounds sympathetic, and returns to his work. You'd ask what he said, but your knowledge of ancient Egyptian language currently sits at 0, plus the ability to nod at things. Still, you linger, watching how efficiently the workers move. Their motions are fluid, practiced, and free from the dramatic huffing and puffing you've been doing for at least the last 20 minutes. They're built for this heat. You are built for grocery store air conditioning and questionable iced coffee habits. As you stand there, trying not to wobble, you remember a quirky historical tidbit. Some ancient Egyptians believed onions held protective properties, not just as food, but even spiritually. They placed them in tombs, used them in rituals, and valued their ability to grow in harsh conditions. You wonder if rubbing one on your forehead might help with the sun. Probably not. But at this point, you're ready to consider any tactic short of wrapping yourself in wet papyrus like a human sandwich. A warm breeze drifts across the fields. You brace for its arrival, expecting refreshment, only to realize it's basically the atmospheric equivalent of someone blowing a hairdryer directly into your face. You squint, blinking against the brightness. The air is so clear that the desert beyond the fields looks almost unreal, heat waves rising from its surface like shimmering ribbons. Historians still argue whether the desert heat in this region was slightly milder thousands of years ago. But regardless of those debates, you can confirm one thing firsthand. It's hot enough to make you wonder if your shadow should also be sweating. You shuffle onward, seeking another scrap of shade, but the ground stretches open and exposed. Somewhere nearby, a farmer cracks a joke. You catch only the rhythm of it. but the other workers laugh. They're already deep into their day, while you're halfway to becoming a cautionary tale about sun exposure. You can practically imagine some ancient scribe noting your experience in a margin. Stranger arrived. Stranger melted. Unfortunate. You pause again to rest, pressing a hand to your forehead. The heat isn't just external anymore. It's inside your skull, sitting behind your eyes like someone lit a candle in your brain. You close them for a moment, breathing slowly. The faint taste of dust settles on your tongue. The hum of fieldwork continues, voices low and steady, tools clicking, donkeys snorting. Life goes on, unbothered by your mild existential crisis. You remember that fellow villagers use natural sun protection beyond clothing. Some applied oils or pastes, some even used mineral pigments mixed with fat. Anything to tame the relentless daylight. You, meanwhile, have the protective strategy of a confused tourist. Squint aggressively and hope for the best. Feeling your face grow warmer, you wander back toward the riverbank, retracing your steps. The sun hangs higher now, bright enough to create sharp white gleams on every reflective surface. Your skin tingles with heat. You wonder if your modern dermatologist would faint just looking at you right now. Back at the Nile's edge, you crouch in the narrow shade of a boulder, sighing as the air turns slightly cooler. A heron glides low over the water, its wings graceful and slow. A calm moment, a welcome pause. And then, very faintly, you hear the soft splash of something heavy entering the water upstream. You immediately straighten. Maybe a fish, maybe a water bird, maybe that crocodile filing cabinet again. You decide not to investigate. Instead, you focus on breathing, the slow, even inhale of someone trying to pretend the sun isn't plotting against them. The heat radiates off the landscape, shimmering in waves that distort the shapes of the distant palm trees. Everything looks almost dreamlike, and yet your body is reminding you constantly that this dream has a thermostat set far too high. For the locals, this is normal, expected, even comforting. But for you, surviving the morning heat is a challenge unto itself. This is only the second hour of your day, and already your energy is slipping away quicker than your hydration levels. Still, you straighten up. The world around you is ancient and alive, and the day has barely begun. There's more heat ahead, more challenges, more surprises, more things your 21st century self is hilariously underprepared for. But for now, the sun glints across the river, the breeze dances in brief, uneven swirls, and you push forward into the brightness, knowing you'll have to face every degree of it. You leave the river's edge again, this time with a little more determination, mostly because staying still means cooking evenly like a rotisserie chicken. The village hums gently as you step back into its sandy pathways. People move with purpose, carrying baskets, tools, or bundles of reeds. You try to mimic their calm stride, hoping to blend in, though you're painfully aware that you look like someone who's trying very hard not to look like they're trying very hard. A woman passes, balancing a clay jar on her shoulder with the elegance of someone who's been doing it since before she could walk. You nod politely, trying to convey the universal, "Yes, I belong here" expression. She narrows her eyes, just a flicker of confusion, and then continues on. You exhale. That was close. Probably too close. If there were an ancient Egypt version of suspicious NPC detection, you'd be running at 92%. You march forward, attempting to copy the posture of the locals. Shoulders relaxed, hands free, gaze focused somewhere between the horizon and the next task. Unfortunately, the more you try to look normal, the more your brain reminds you of every single thing you're not supposed to do. Don't stare, don't speak unless spoken to, don't trip over that pottery jar, don't pet that cat. Wait, no, actually you could pet the cat, that's fine here. Egyptians adored cats. Still, you decide not to risk it. You stroll past a craftsman shaping a wooden stool, chips flying in rhythmic bursts. The man glances up, eyes sharpening with curiosity. You give him a confident nod, as if to say, "Ah, Yes, woodworking. I too, in my homeland, far away, have definitely cut at least, one piece of wood. He stares a moment longer. Your palms begin sweating. Thankfully, he simply shrugs and continues carving, the scrape of his tools smoothing your nerves. But as you continue deeper into the village, you feel it. The growing realization that blending in here requires more than copying people's body language. Social roles are deeply defined, and people here know where everyone belongs. Laborers dress one way, fishermen another. Merchants carry themselves differently from farmers. You, draped in the ancient Egyptian equivalent of borrowed pajamas, are a walking question mark. A small group gathers near the market stalls. Women with baskets of herbs, a potter arranging freshly fired jars, and a scribe in a simple linen kilt who looks like he's been awake since sunrise copying tax records. You inch closer, trying to appear naturally included, the same way you once tried to blend into a conversation at a party where you knew no one and had no idea what anyone was talking about. Then the scribe's eyes land on you. He squints. You freeze. His gaze traces your clothing, your posture, the mild panic leaking from your face. He tilts his head slightly, as if mentally flipping through a list of people who are supposed to be here and discovering you are not on it. You swallow. Maybe you can fix this. Maybe a subtle wave? A friendly grunt? A simple nod? You nod. Slowly. Too slowly. You have in fact performed the slowest nod in Egyptian history. The scribe blinks. Then, mercifully, another villager calls his attention away, and he leaves you alone with your poor life choices. You stagger back a few steps. Whew! That could have been the part where someone asks for your work assignment, your overseer, or worse, your lineage. And since your answer would have been some variation of, "My father is from a place with, roads," it would have raised far too many eyebrows. Still, you keep walking. With every step through the village, you attempt to adopt the rhythm of the locals. You pass a group of children playing a simple game with knuckle bones, tossing them into the air with practiced flicks. One boy pauses, staring at your shoes, or what remains of your reed sandals, and giggles. You're not sure what part of the sandal is funny, but you assume the answer is all of it. He says something in rapid-fire Egyptian. You nod, like that explains everything. The boy raises an eyebrow. You shuffle away before he decides to adopt you as his personal verbal practice project. Further ahead, a pair of fishermen repair a net with fingertips that move fast and sure, weaving strands of flax with muscle memory passed down through generations. You watch quietly, admiring the flow of their movements. One of them notices your interest and gestures for you to come closer. You approach, trying to seem confident. He indicates the net, handing you a length of cord. Oh no. You attempt to help. You really do. But your fingers fumble like they've never seen string before. You loop the cord through the net in entirely the wrong direction. You tug where you shouldn't. You knot something that was absolutely not supposed to be knotted. The fisherman's expression shifts from amused patience to dawning horror. He gently, very gently, takes the cord back from your hand, as if preventing a larger disaster. Then he pats your shoulder, comforting, condescending, and entirely earned. You laugh weakly. The fisherman laughs kindly. A soft moment, but still a reminder. You are not blending in. Trying desperately to recover your dignity, you wander onward. The smell of baking bread wafts through the air. Egyptians loved making flat loaves in clay ovens, a mainstream fact that explains why almost every household has someone kneading dough right now. Your stomach growls, loudly. You instantly regret being alive in a village where sound carries far. You pass another house where a woman mixes a paste of natron, water, and herbs. She glances up briefly, and you remember a quirky tidbit. Natron wasn't just used for mummification. It was also a common cleaning agent, deodorizer, and even toothpaste. You consider asking for some to hide the smell of your escalating stress sweat, but your lack of language skills prevents that. So you smile, nod, and keep walking like a polite, sweaty ghost drifting through the streets. At a crossroads, you stop. People move purposefully around you. Each knows exactly where they belong. You stand out not because you're strange-looking, plenty of travelers pass through ancient Egypt, but because you don't fit the rhythm. Your steps falter. Your eyes linger too long. You react too quickly or too slowly. You don't have the instinctive ease of someone who knows the cultural choreography. Historians still argue whether social mobility in certain periods of Egyptian history was more flexible than we assume. But at this moment, you don't need a historical debate to understand your situation. You are painfully unfamiliar, and everyone can sense it. A man carrying a bundle of papyrus stops beside you. He gives you a curious once-over, then asks a question, something that sounds like, "Where are you from?" You panic. Your brain empties. You consider pointing at the sky. You consider running. You consider pretending you suddenly can't hear. Instead, you nod. For the 15th time today. The man stares. You stare. A goat bleats somewhere, adding tension. He tries again. Yes, same. Even though it almost certainly does not. The man raises an eyebrow so dramatically you swear he invented sarcasm on the spot. Then he waves dismissively and walks away, muttering. You deflate, feeling like you failed the world's simplest social interaction. You take a deep breath. Blending in, it turns out, is a full-time job, and you're extremely underqualified. People here aren't unkind, they're observant. They know each other's routines, families, and mannerisms. You, the confused outsider in the weirdly wrapped linen, are simply too easy to spot. Still, you keep walking. Because despite the awkwardness, there's something soothing in this village hum. Something steady, something grounded. The warmth, the chatter, the scent of fresh bread and damp clay. Even if you can't blend into it, you can walk through it. You can feel its heartbeat. You just need to keep your head down, keep nodding strategically, and maybe stop trying to fix fishing nets. Eventually, someone is bound to accept you as that strange person visiting from the next village over who doesn't talk much. And honestly, you'll take it. You drift away from the cluster of curious villagers, determined to look like someone who has important morning tasks awaiting them, even though your only real task is don't cause a cultural incident before lunchtime. As you wander between mud brick homes, the warm scent of baking bread intensifies, mingling with the earthy smell of wet clay and the faint tang of smoke. Your stomach gives a deep, theatrical rumble. A few villagers glance over. You pretend it wasn't you. They pretend they believe you. A woman stands near a low, dome-shaped clay oven, the ancient Egyptian taboon, using a long paddle to slide in rounds of dough. Thin wisps of heat shimmer upward, carrying aromas that feel like someone distilled comfort into air. Before you can even think about blending in, your body leans slightly toward the oven like a cartoon character being lured by scent trails. The woman catches your movement and raises one eyebrow. Not unfriendly, just curious, the way someone might look at a cat who has wandered into the wrong kitchen. You offer a quick nod and a small smile, hoping to convey something along the lines of, "Ah yes, bread making, my specialty." She watches you for a beat, then breaks off a small corner of a cooling loaf and hands it to you. Relief floods through you. Hospitality, a lifeline. You accept it with both hands because that feels respectful, and take a cautious bite. It's warm, slightly chewy, and gritty with bran. Ancient Egyptian bread wasn't exactly Michelin star fluffiness. Stone-ground flour left tiny bits of sand and grit behind. A mainstream historical fact, Dentists examining ancient skulls often find tooth wear so extreme it looks like everyone had been chewing gravel for fun. You get a first-hand sample of that experience as a fine crunch crackles unexpectedly between your teeth. The woman laughs gently at your startled expression. You smile back, pretending you planned for your molars to encounter sediment. Sure, totally normal breakfast texture. You thank her with another nod, your signature move at this point, and shuffle along before she decides to ask you for help kneading dough, which would definitely end in disaster. A few steps later, another aroma elbows its way into your senses, a thick, herby smell coming from a courtyard where a group of women crush ingredients in a large stone mortar. Intrigued, you step closer. One of them grinds a mix of natron and herbs into a coarse powder. Another stirs something in a clay bowl that looks suspiciously like toothpaste. And by toothpaste, you mean a gritty, phony mixture that would absolutely make a modern dentist sob quietly into their hands. You watch as one woman dips her finger into the paste and brushes it across her teeth. She smiles proudly. You grin back, trying to seem supportive, while internally thinking, if I do that, my gums will file an official complaint. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some Egyptian toothpaste recipes included crushed eggshells and pumice, basically a polite way of sanding your teeth. You instinctively take one tiny, cautious step backward. The women notice, laugh, and wave you off as if to say, "Relax, we're not applying this to you." You exhale in relief, your enamel whispering its thanks. Moving on, you find yourself near a small stream branching off the Nile, where several villagers are washing their hands and faces. A row of low wooden benches sits nearby, and you recognize that this is the closest thing to Morning Hygiene Central. You decide to attempt participating. Carefully, cautiously, with the confidence of a person who has absolutely none. You kneel beside the water and splash your face. It's refreshing, but carries a hint of silt, like your pores are being politely introduced to the river's personality. Your hands brush against fine mud, and you can't help imagining what your modern skincare products would say if they could see this. Something like, "We worked so hard for you, and this is how you repay us?" As you rinse your hands, a man next to you scoops up water with a small clay cup and pours it over his arms, rubbing in a handful of natron until it forms a thin paste. He glances over, as if expecting you to do the same. You freeze. You try to smile. Then you pick up a tiny pinch of natron and dab it onto your palms with exaggerated caution, like you're seasoning a dish on a cooking show. The man stares, then breaks into a grin so wide you feel both relieved and mildly roasted. He says something you don't understand, but the tone is clear. Good try. You nod, he nods. Mutual respect achieved. Then comes the moment you wish you could avoid, the latrine area. Ancient Egypt's hygiene practices were pretty good for the time, but let's be honest, no matter how you package it, a communal waste pit is still a communal waste pit. You approach it reluctantly, holding your breath. Nearby, a few residents chat casually, entirely unfazed. You, on the other hand, are questioning every decision that led you here, including the unfortunate lack of modern plumbing. You stand there, unsure of the procedure. A young boy notices your hesitation and does the ancient equivalent of rolling his eyes. He gestures, helpfully, efficiently, a little impatiently. You follow his instructions, trying to maintain dignity. You fail, you survive. On your way out, you pass someone tossing ashes over the pit, a common method for reducing smell and speeding decomposition. A mainstream fact, ashes and sand were the go-to disinfectants before anyone invented scented toilet spray. You mentally thank ancient innovators, while also promising yourself never to take a modern bathroom for granted again. You escape back into fresh air, inhaling deeply like you've just emerged from underwater. A woman nearby is applying perfume, one of the rich, oil-based kinds Egyptians adored. She warms a small glob of scented resin between her fingers, then smooths it onto her neck. The smell wafts toward you, sweet, earthy, slightly floral. Cleopatra-level luxurious. It almost makes you forget that you just visited history's least glamorous location. You try your best to act like someone familiar with ancient perfume customs. You inhale appreciatively. Maybe too appreciatively. The woman raises an eyebrow, amused. You quickly step back. Meanwhile, another villager approaches, carrying a small basket of herbs and flowers. Lotus, perhaps, or mandrake. He hands one to you, a pleasant gesture. You sniff it politely. It smells earthy, cool, with a faint sweetness. But you also remember a weird historical tidbit. Ancient love potions sometimes involved mandrake roots, which people thought held magical properties. You immediately stop sniffing and hold the flower at a safe distance. The villager laughs. You chuckle back. You're bonding now through humor, which is great because language is still not your friend. As you wander on, you spot a well-to-do family enjoying a simple breakfast in the shade. Bread, figs, beer thick enough to count as food, and some soft cheese. Beer was a staple here, not the crisp, bubbly kind, but a hearty, porridge-like drink full of calories. You watch them sip it casually while chatting. You wonder if it's socially acceptable to ask for a sample. Probably not. Also, your stomach is already making suspicious noises from the earlier bread grit. A young servant carries a jar of water to refill their cups. Another sweeps sand from their threshold, an endless Sisyphean task. You think about offering to help sweep, just to look useful, but then you imagine accidentally sweeping sand into someone's food and getting politely escorted out of the century. You keep walking. Historians still debate whether most Egyptians had rigid morning routines or flexible ones depending on the season. But based on what you're seeing, one thing is undeniable. Everyone here knows exactly what to do, where to be, and how to behave. And you, despite all your attempts, remain an enthusiastic mess wrapped in linen. Yet, as you move through the village, face still damp from the Nile, teeth gritty from bread, hands smelling faintly of natron, you feel something shift. You're still out of place, but the shock is fading. You're becoming part of the scenery. The villagers glance at you less. The children stop staring. Even the goats ignore you, which is both humbling and comforting. You breathe deeper. The morning continues. The heat rises. And as you stand there in the sun-drenched courtyard, drying your face and adjusting your makeshift linen wrap, you realize you're surviving. Barely, grainily, but surviving. And that's enough to carry you into the next challenge of your Egyptian day. You barely finish brushing off the last grains of sand from your arms before someone waves you over with the unmistakable "come here, stranger." It's not malicious, just assertive, the way someone summons a person who obviously has nothing useful to do. You hesitate, but in ancient Egypt, standing around looking confused is basically the same as volunteering for work. So you shuffle forward, trying to look like you know exactly what's happening, even though the only thing you're confident about is that this is going to go poorly. The man who called you over looks you up and down, squints, and decides you're capable enough for something. He hands you a tool that looks halfway between a hoe and a torture device. It has weight, actual weight, something your gym app definitely doesn't prepare you for. You grip it wrong immediately, and he corrects you with a tired sigh. The kind parents use when their kid tries to put shoes on their hands. Before you can ask any clarifying questions, he leads you toward a group of people working along an irrigation canal. They're rhythmically digging, smoothing, and shaping the earth, maintaining the channels that help carry Nile water into the fields. It's elegant in a way, almost like a choreographed dance, except everyone in this particular troupe has been doing it since childhood. And then there's you, holding the tool like it's an IKEA shelf you've already given up on. You take your place among them, and immediately your body informs you that you are not prepared for ancient agricultural life. You raise the tool once, and your shoulders already feel like they've filed a complaint. The second swing is worse. By the third, you're making a small noise, something between a grunt and the sound you make when trying not to drop a hot pan. A farmer glances over, amused, probably thinking you're reenacting the creation myth of someone struggling their way into existence. But this right here, is the kind of labor most ordinary Egyptians did daily. Not building pyramids, despite the popular image. Those were seasonal, rotating crews with food, medical care, and even recorded sick days. No, the real exhausting work was here in the fields, where the sun is already creeping up, and you can feel its warmth gathering like it's preparing to slap you by midday. As you attempt to mimic the motions of the others, you notice how efficient they are. They shift their weight with practiced ease, their bare feet gripping the ground with stability you could never dream of. You're wearing whatever random sandals you arrived in. Let's just say they do not help. Every few minutes you wobble, fight for balance, and nearly tip into the canal. One of the workers finally chuckles and says something you can't understand, but the tone is unmistakable. You're really not cut out for this, are you? A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Egypt's agricultural system was incredibly advanced for its time, relying on the annual flooding of the Nile and a vast network of irrigation channels. Maintaining those channels wasn't optional. It was the backbone of civilization. And now here you are, personally lowering Egypt's agricultural output by roughly 0.00001% just by existing. You try to contribute more, planting your feet, focusing your breathing, doing the whole "you've got this" speech you usually reserve for assembling flat-pack furniture. It doesn't help. The ground is uneven, the dirt is dense, and the tool somehow gets heavier every time you look at it. And because life enjoys contrast, one of the teenage workers beside you is doing twice your output while humming casually, as if this is just a warm-up before his actual chores. Historians still argue whether average Egyptians were healthier than many later medieval populations. But standing here, watching these people work with precision, endurance, and a kind of quiet teamwork, you're starting to think, yes, feels pretty plausible. Meanwhile, your hands are already forming blisters that scream, "Nope! We are city hands! We were not forged for manual labor!" You switch tasks to avoid collapsing, but unfortunately, the next task isn't easier. You're directed to help carry baskets of silt scraped from the canals. When they hand you a basket, you assume it's empty. It is not empty. It just looks empty because ancient Egyptians were extremely good at packing dense mud in ways that defy physics. You lift it anyway, but your posture immediately collapses into the shape of a question mark. A quirky little detail, many workers used a kind of early version of a neck yoke or shoulder strap to help carry loads more evenly. You, however, receive no such device. You get the tourist edition, which is just your hands, your questionable form, and your fragile pride. The walk is short, but the basket grows heavier with every step, as if the mud is quietly absorbing pieces of your soul. You set it down near a growing pile and pretend you're fine, even though you've just done the ancient equivalent of moving one tiny Lego brick in the middle of constructing a skyscraper. You try to stretch casually, but even the stretch hurts. A worker beside you demonstrates a more efficient grip technique. You try it, but your body disagrees immediately. Your wrists buckle, and somehow you poke yourself in the ribs with the handle, which takes talent. The worker just shakes his head, maybe wondering what bizarre province you came from where people are raised without muscle. You take a short break, leaning on your tool like an exhausted traveler leaning on a staff. The moment your weight shifts slightly, the tool head sinks into the soft earth, and you nearly topple forward. The teenager from earlier bursts into laughter. You would glare at him, but honestly, you'd laugh too if you weren't so busy trying not to pass out. Then comes the part where they attempt to show you how to pack the silt properly along the banks. They move with a swift, practiced motion. Smooth, deliberate, minimal wasted energy. You go to replicate their motion and instead create a small, sad puff of dirt that barely sticks to itself. One of the workers steps in immediately and redoes everything you just did. Nicely, politely, but still. And as if labor weren't enough, the sun keeps climbing, heavier, brighter, like someone slowly turning up a heat lamp above you. You wipe your forehead for the 50th time, but sweat keeps dripping into your eyes, stinging just enough to annoy you. Meanwhile, the locals seem barely bothered. Their skin, their rhythms, their entire physiology is simply adapted, built for this world. You're overheating like a smartphone left on a car dashboard. To be fair, not all work in ancient Egypt was backbreaking. There were scribes, artisans, beer brewers, linen workers, jobs requiring precision more than brute force. But those roles required training, status, or apprenticeship you absolutely do not have. You catch yourself eyeing a group of scribes under a shaded awning, writing on papyrus with calm dignity. That could be you think, sitting, writing, shading, but no. Today, you're firmly in the physical labor until your spirit leaves your body category. By midday, you're convinced your arms have detached themselves. They're just hanging there, flopping like decorative accessories. Every muscle aches, your knees wobble, even your eyelids feel tired. When the work crew stops for a break, you practically collapse in the nearest patch of shade. No one mocks you this time. They're too busy drinking water, eating small snacks, and preparing for the second half of the workday, which makes you want to cry a little. You sit there, panting softly, realizing deeply, profoundly, that you simply do not have ancient Egyptian endurance. These people are tough, efficient, and coordinated. You are melting, slightly confused, and questioning your life choices. And yes, you absolutely wouldn't last a day here. You shuffle onward, still brushing crumbs from your hands, when the morning light sharpens across the village and catches the soft ripple of linen on every person who passes you. You've seen the images in museums, white or cream garments, simple and elegant, but wearing them is another story entirely. The linen clings, then flaps, then sticks again in all the wrong places. You adjust the fold at your waist for the 12th time, hoping no one notices how confused you still are about which part is supposed to wrap over or under. Spoiler, everyone notices. The fabric itself is surprisingly fine, woven from flax that takes an enormous amount of labor to produce. Egyptians from thousands of years ago were basically world champions of textile patience, yet you still find yourself tugging at a seam that feels like it could unravel if you breathe too hard. You pass a group of women beating flax fibers into softness, and one of them shoots you a quick glance as if to say, "You have no idea how long that shirt took to make, do you?" And she's right. Modern wardrobes have spoiled you beyond redemption. As you continue walking, the first gust of wind hits you. And by wind, you mean a swirling little tornado of sand that instantly gets into your eyes, your ears, your mouth, and somehow inside your linen, which you didn't think was even possible. You splutter and cough, earning a sympathetic laugh from a nearby fisherman. He gestures vaguely as if to say, "Yep, first sandstorm nibble of the day. Happens." A mainstream historical fact slides naturally into your mind. The desert winds really did carry fine sand constantly into settlements, enough to wear down stone statues over centuries. Meanwhile, you're losing the battle against it in seconds. You glance down and see the new layer of grit coating your feet. Egyptians often went barefoot, but you wobble with every step like you're learning to walk again. The sand is warm already, and it's only mid-morning. You do a little hop dance, trying to shake it out of your sandals. Yes, you manage to borrow a pair, but the sand returns immediately, settling between your toes with cosmic determination. A child watches you struggle and giggles, and honestly, you can't blame them. You must look like someone trying to perform interpretive dance while also having a personal crisis. One light joke down, two to go. The longer you walk, the more you realize the sand isn't just inconvenient, it's everywhere. In the folds of buildings, in baskets, on sleeping mats, in food. You spot a woman kneading dough on a board, and even though she's working carefully, a tiny, almost invisible cloud of dust settles over the surface. And that's normal. People lived with it as unavoidably as you live with the hum of traffic or the buzz of a phone notification. Although your modern stomach might protest later, theirs hardly blinked. Sand was basically the seasoning no one asked for, but everyone received. And then there's the itch. Oh, the itch. You scratch your shoulder, then your hip, then your forearm, discovering new irritations every few seconds. Linen, for all its beauty, can rub in the heat. Add sweat, humidity near the river, and the constant drift of dust, and your skin is staging a mild rebellion. Someone passing by casually rubs oil onto their own arms, castor or sesame maybe, and you realize hydration isn't just about drinking water. Ancient Egyptians moisturized constantly to protect themselves from the brutal dryness. A quirky historical tidbit floats up in your memory. Some elites even used perfumed cones of scented fat that melted slowly over their heads during celebrations, soaking their hair and skin. You try to imagine yourself wearing one and instantly feel like a scented candle with performance anxiety. You find a patch of shade next to a mud brick wall, grateful for the momentary break. The wall radiates heat like it's been storing sunlight for decades, which, in fairness, it has. You rest your back against it anyway, letting your breath return to something resembling normal. But comfort lasts only a moment before something tiny tickles your ankle. You look down and spot a line of ants marching with purpose, undisturbed by your presence. You step aside, trying not to interrupt their commute, thinking about how historians still argue whether Egyptian houses had significant pest control methods, or just I live here too. Based on what you're seeing, it's probably a bit of both. You brush more sand from your clothes, which only causes more sand to appear, like some ancient dust-based magic trick. The air smells faintly of smoked fish from a nearby stall, mixed with hot earth and the sweetness of date palms. You take a breath and try to appreciate the layered sensory world around you. This was daily life, ordinary, unremarkable. And yet, for you, it feels like survival on hard mode. A merchant walks past carrying a bundle of folded linen garments dyed with pale earth pigments, rust, cream, muted green. The colors remind you that while we often picture Egyptians in all-white clothing, dyes were used more commonly than people think. Not neon bright stuff, but soft tones that blended with the landscape. You briefly imagine yourself in mint green linen and decide you'd still look sweaty and confused, so maybe stick to beige for today. You move on again, feeling the sun climb higher behind you. The linen at your back clings with heat and humidity. You wonder, vaguely, whether the ancient Egyptians had any equivalent of modern deodorant. They did have scented oils and incense, but you're fairly certain that at this moment you smell like a mixture of dust, fear, and regret. Another gust of wind kicks up. The sand bites your cheeks like tiny, unfriendly bees. You shield your eyes, muttering something that earns another amused look from a passerby. You get the sense that the locals, though polite, are mentally placing bets on how long you can last out here. If there were an ancient Egyptian Vegas, the odds would not be in your favor. Your throat tightens with dryness, and you lick your lips only to taste dust again. A woman carrying a jar of water glances at you with mild pity. Water, you remember, is precious here. Not impossible to find, but heavily tied to the rhythms of the Nile, its flood, and its temper. This land is both generous and unforgiving, and you're experiencing more of the second part at the moment. As you keep walking, adjusting your clothing, scratching at one stubborn patch of irritation under your arm, you begin to understand the quiet resilience of the people around you. They weren't just living in the past. They were mastering an environment that demands constant adaptation, fast reflexes, strong habits, and a tolerance for discomfort that modern humans can barely imagine. And just when you think you've gotten used to it, a final swirl of sand slips right under your collar and down your spine, making you shiver in a way that would be comedic if it weren't so intensely unpleasant.
Congratulations! You've now experienced the fashion hazards of ancient Egypt, and the day's still young.
You finally escape the latest sand gust and make your way toward the river, drawn by the shimmering line of blue that promises relief, even if only for a moment. The Nile looks impossibly calm from a distance, smooth as polished stone, gentle as a lullaby, almost like it's inviting you closer. But you know better now. If ancient Egypt has taught you anything, it's that every harmless thing is secretly plotting to test your survival skills. And the Nile? Ugh, the Nile has a resume of dangers long enough to need its own scroll. Still, the promise of cool water is too tempting, especially after your long morning of sweating, blinking through dust, and itching in places you didn't know linen could reach. You trudge closer, feeling the ground change beneath your feet, from powdery sand to firmer, darker soil rich with silt. This is the gift of the floodplain, the very reason Egypt existed at all. Civilization here didn't rise with stone and ambition first. It rose with mud, grain, and an incredibly well-timed annual flood. A mainstream historical fact. The inundation of the Nile was so predictable it practically functioned like a natural cosmic calendar, arriving each year between June and September. You step onto the soft bank, and your foot sinks a little, squishing into the moist earth. It's surprisingly pleasant, almost cool. One of the rare moments where nature here offers tenderness instead of a slap. You crouch down, letting your fingers trace the mud, and for a split second, you imagine yourself farming. Just you, a hoe, and endless rows of thriving crops. Then you remember how quickly you almost fainted earlier in the sun and decide farming might not be in your destiny. A few fishermen are preparing their nets nearby, unfazed by your presence. They work with practiced calm, their hands moving rhythmically as if they've done this every day since they were strong enough to hold a net. You watch one of them push off in a papyrus skiff. It's light, elegant, and looks like it would immediately sink under your weight. But it doesn't. Those boats were engineering marvels, flexible, buoyant, and built precisely for these waters. You take another step toward the river's edge, thinking maybe just splashing your face won't hurt anyone. But before your fingers even graze the surface, a sharp splash erupts farther down the bank. Something large and unsettling disappears beneath the water. You freeze. Another fisherman glances over and casually shrugs, as if to say, just one of the usual murder logs. And that's your introduction to the Nile crocodile. You've read the stories, sure, but reading about a creature and seeing the water ripple from its tail are two very different experiences. Nile crocodiles are impressive, ancient, and absolutely uninterested in your modern sense of personal safety. Ancient Egyptians respected them deeply, sometimes worshipped them, sometimes feared them, often both. The crocodile god Sobek wasn't a symbolic metaphor. He was a theological response to a very real threat lurking in the reeds.
You take several steps back. Several. More steps back. No one else seems concerned, which tells you everything you need to know about your own survival chances here. Another tiny joke slips into your mind. You're starting to understand why ancient Egyptians had no word for vacation. When every daily task includes dodging large reptiles, relaxation is probably more of an abstract concept.
As you retreat, you notice a group of children playing farther up the bank. They're splashing water at each other, laughing, seemingly unafraid of anything. But look closely, and you see they're in a shallow inlet separated from the main flow, safe enough for them to play without turning into cautionary tales. Ancient Egyptians knew these waters intimately. They understood where the river flowed gently, where it deepened suddenly, and where certain creatures preferred to lurk. You? Your entire strategy so far has been don't die, which is admittedly valid but lacks nuance. You decide to wander a little farther along the bank. The air here smells different, cooler, wetter, tinged with reeds. Dragonflies dart past you in flashes of iridescent blue and green. Birds call softly from the rushes, including ibises, those long-beaked creatures that always look like they're judging your life choices. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low grunt of a hippo. You pause. You want to believe it's just your imagination, but no, there it is again. Hippos are deceptively adorable. You see them on modern nature documentaries, lounging peacefully, yawning dramatically, looking like floating marshmallows. But here, they represent the unofficial boss battle of Nile life. A quirky tidbit you may not know: hippos were responsible for more deaths than crocodiles in some periods of ancient history. They're huge, territorial, and extremely bad at sharing space with anyone who isn't also a hippo. You decide, wisely, that you don't need to go any closer to the noise. You settle yourself on a fallen reed mat left near the bank, giving your feet a chance to rest. The grass beneath you rustles, and a tiny frog hops away from your sandal. You can almost pretend, for a moment, that the riverside is peaceful. Almost. But, as has become tradition in ancient Egypt, peace lasts about 20 seconds before discomfort creeps back in. Mosquitoes, those ancient and surprisingly loyal companions to humanity, begin to find you. You slap one off your arm, missing badly, and earn a small wealth for your trouble. The fishermen nearby don't seem bothered at all. You watch one of them smear something along his arms, perhaps a bit of fragrant oil or resin, a trick passed down generations. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had a specific understanding of mosquitoes transmitting disease or simply viewed them as annoying pests. Judging from the fishermen's casual preventative measures, you're guessing they knew plenty, even without microscopes. As you sit, a small boat drifts past, carrying baskets of freshly caught fish. The men inside wave politely. One of them holds up a fish the size of your forearm, as if showing off. You nod, impressed, though you pray silently that no one expects you to gut or clean one anytime soon. The river continues its gentle murmur, a reminder that despite its dangers, it's also the lifeline of this entire civilization. It irrigates fields, feeds families, transports goods, and anchors daily routines. Standing here, you feel a strange mixture of awe and intimidation, like you're witnessing a force of nature that is both generous and brutally honest about its boundaries. You dip one toe, just one, into a safe-looking pool that seems too shallow for crocodile mischief. The water is cool, refreshing, a tiny mercy in an otherwise relentless landscape. You close your eyes, letting your shoulders soften as the breeze brushes your skin. For a fleeting moment, you imagine living here, not as a visitor, but as someone adapted to this world. Someone who knows the river not as a threat, but as a partner. Then a beetle crawls across your hand, and the moment ends. You flick it off gently, chuckling under your breath. Another joke accomplished. You stand, brushing reeds from your clothes, and take one last look at the Nile. Calm, ancient, everlasting, and absolutely not a place for spontaneous swimming. Time to continue your journey. After all, you've only survived half a day so far. You leave the riverbank behind, shaking a few stubborn reeds from your sandals as you rejoin the narrow path leading deeper into the settlement. The sound of water fades, replaced by the low hum of voices, the clacking of tools, and the rhythmic thud of someone pounding grains somewhere nearby. Ahead, rising above the mud brick homes and woven fences, you begin to see the pale stone silhouette of a temple complex. At first, you're not sure whether you're even allowed to walk in that direction. Temples in ancient Egypt weren't casual hangout spots. They were cosmic machine rooms, places where gods were fed, clothed,
perfumed, and serenaded by priests who took their job descriptions extremely seriously. You, on the other hand, are still struggling to keep your linen from bunching like a toddler's bedsheet, not exactly priest material. Still, curiosity pulls you forward. The temple gleams faintly in the sunlight, its whitewashed walls reflecting heat like a giant heavenly mirror. As you approach, you notice the air growing quieter. People speak in softer tones here, footsteps slow. Even the wind seems to hush out of respect. You pass under a simple wooden gate marking the temple district. No guards stop you, not yet, but everyone around you moves with deliberate care, and you sense immediately that you're in a space governed by invisible lines. Cross the wrong one, and even if no crocodile is involved this time, your day could get complicated very quickly.
The path widens into a courtyard dotted with offering tables. Some hold small bowls of bread, flowers, or fruits. Others hold incense pellets shaped like tiny cones. A faint smell of myrrh drifts in the air, warm and sweet, like someone just opened an ancient essential oil diffuser. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Temples weren't just for worship. They were major economic centers with their own estates, workers, scribes, livestock, and storage rooms filled with offerings. As you take this in, a priest emerges from one of the side buildings. He's dressed in pristine linen, far cleaner than your dusty lived-in version, and his head is shaved smooth. He glances at you with mild curiosity, not hostility, but you definitely get the vibe that you're one eyebrow raise away from being asked, "Are you lost?" You offer a small, respectful nod, the universal gesture for, "Hi, I mean no trouble, please don't smite me with a ceremonial object." The priest accepts this with a quiet nod of his own before moving on, but you remain hyper-aware of your posture. Suddenly, every step feels like it needs a permission slip. You wander toward a wall decorated with carved hieroglyphs. The images show familiar scenes, gods, pharaohs, ritual acts, but seeing them in color, close enough to touch, is something else entirely. You resist the powerful urge to reach out because you just know that would be a problem. This is sacred art, not a museum exhibit. Touching it would be like high-fiving a deity. Bad idea. Nearby, you hear the melodic chanting of another group of priests. Their voices ripple in a steady cadence, rising and falling like a slow breath. You can't understand the words, but the rhythm alone sends a small shiver through you, almost hypnotic. You wonder what the ceremony is. Historians still argue whether certain daily rituals were closed exclusively to priests, or whether lay people could observe portions from the outer halls. Given the glances you're getting, you decide you're firmly in the observe from a polite distance category. A quirky tidbit nudges its way into your thoughts. Some temples kept sacred animals within their grounds, not just as symbols, but as actual living embodiments of gods. Cats, falcons, ibises, even crocodiles for Sobek's temples. You scan the courtyard nervously, half expecting a divine crocodile to come waddling around a corner. Thankfully, none appear, though you do spot a sleek temple cat slinking across the stone floor with a confidence that suggests ownership of the entire establishment. It stops to stare at you, judging you. Completely valid. You proceed farther in, though carefully. The deeper you go, the more obvious it becomes that not every doorway is meant for you. Some passages are roped off with simple reed barriers. Others are guarded by young temple attendants carrying staffs. Not weapons exactly, but definitely enough to say, "Please don't test me." One attendant watches you hover near a shaded portico. He smiles slightly, polite but firm, and gestures for you to stay outside. Message received. You nod and step back. The attendant returns to his position, and you release the breath you were holding. The courtyard has places of allowed wandering, small gardens, basins for ritual washing, and shaded benches that look inviting. You slip toward one of the benches and sit, grateful for a break.
The stone is warm beneath you, but not scorching. You watch as a few townspeople bring offerings. A woman with a basket of grain, a man carrying lotus flowers, a child holding oranges with both hands. Each performs a small bow or gesture before handing the items to a priest. The temple seems alive with quiet intention. Even the insects here buzz with restraint, as if they've agreed not to be annoying within sacred boundaries. Your eyes drift to a side chamber where large ceramic jars are stacked in neat rows. You're pretty sure those hold oil, beer, or grain. Temples needed vast stores to function. And right when you're wondering how priests kept everything so remarkably organized, your brain offers up joke number one. Maybe they had the world's earliest don't touch anything policy. Based on your experience so far, that seems accurate. A gentle breeze sweeps through the courtyard, carrying a mix of incense and lotus scent. You inhale deeply and relax your shoulders. For a moment, the temple feels like a refuge, not intimidating, but deeply peaceful. A place where time moves differently, like each breath echoes 1,000 years back and 1,000 years forward. But the calm is short-lived. A group of visiting officials enters the courtyard. They move confidently, with the ease of people who absolutely know the rules and expect everyone else to follow them. Their jewelry glints in the sunlight, and their crisp clothing is spotless. You instinctively scoot farther into the corner of your bench, hoping you blend into the wall. One of the officials eyes you with a raised brow. You quickly lower your gaze, pretending to study a plant near your feet, an awkwardly tall reed that offers zero camouflage. The official murmurs something to a companion, who glances at you again, but they continue walking. You silently celebrate your narrow escape. A temple scribe passes by shortly after, carrying a wooden writing palette with reed pens tucked neatly into grooves. You catch a glimpse of his papyrus scroll covered in tight columns of hieratic script. For all the grandeur of the temple, it's the scribes who keep everything running. The accountants, the recorders, the librarians, the administrators. You watch him disappear into a chamber and feel a small pang of envy. At least his job doesn't require dodging crocodiles or hippos. Before leaving, you decide to approach a basin near the entrance, a shallow pool of clear water surrounded by carved stone. It's used for ritual purification, not public drinking, so you make sure not to dip anything into it. You simply stand there, letting the sight cool your nerves. Another small joke bubbles up. If there were a sign here, it would probably say, "No splashing, no swimming, no divine contamination." Reasonable rules, honestly. With one last respectful glance around, you begin stepping back toward the gate, careful not to cross any forbidden thresholds. The temple doesn't feel hostile, just deeply structured, like a place that expects you to follow choreography you were never taught. As you exit into the sunlight, the everyday noise of the village returns. The chatter, the tools, the rush of daily life. The shift is almost jarring. You feel as though you've left a different world entirely, one that breathes in incense and whispers in stone. You wipe a bit of dust from your linen, straighten your sandals, and prepare to rejoin the flow of ordinary tasks, still very aware that sacred boundaries in ancient Egypt are no joke, and you've just navigated them with the grace of an anxious tourist. Not bad for someone who wouldn't last a day here. You step back into the lively rhythm of the village, feeling the sun's warmth on your shoulders and the faint grit of sand under your feet. After the hushed reverence of the temple, the ordinary bustle feels almost comforting. Children run past you, chasing a stray goat or tossing knucklebones into a rough circle drawn in the dirt. You watch for a moment, trying to follow the rules of casual observation. You don't interact, don't point, don't attempt to show off some obscure knowledge from your own time. Small victories that feel monumental in the context of survival. A small group of farmers is working nearby, turning over soil with hoes. The rhythmic thump and scrape fills the air, accompanied by faint grunts. The smell of freshly upturned earth mixes with dust and the faint sweetness of wild herbs that grow along the pathways. You remind yourself of a mainstream historical fact. The Egyptians' agricultural techniques depended heavily on the Nile's annual flooding, which deposited nutrient-rich silt on the fields. This irrigation cycle dictated almost every aspect of village life, from planting schedules to market activity. You notice a farmer glance your way. You offer your patented nod. He doesn't nod back. Not that he seems offended, more like he's puzzled by your level of nervous energy radiating through your linen wrap. You shuffle forward, careful to step between clumps of soil and avoid crushing tender seedlings. It's exhausting to try to look natural, but you're determined. You might not last a day here in any real sense, but at least you can pretend for a few more hours. Nearby, a donkey brays, hauling a cart stacked with clay pots. The animal's movements are steady and purposeful, but the clatter of pottery jars shifting with each step reminds you that transporting goods in ancient Egypt was no simple task. Merchants and farmers alike relied on careful packing and patience, skills you realize you possess in minimal amounts. You sidestep a small clay shard, wondering if stepping on it would have counted as a crime against pottery craftsmanship? Probably. As you walk, the smell of freshly baked bread once again tempts your stomach. You round a corner and see a woman rolling dough with the same patience you wish you had when untangling your linen wrap. She's using a stone surface, and her hands move with practiced rhythm. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces. Some Egyptian breads were deliberately coarse because finer flour wasn't always available, and grains often contained small bits of chaff, creating an unexpectedly crunchy texture. You realize that the bread you sampled earlier wasn't just rustic, it was entirely authentic. Your stomach grumbles audibly. You curse yourself for forgetting to eat before embarking on this day of mild terror and mild acclamation. Then you remember the beer bread you saw being delivered to a temple. Beer in ancient Egypt was often more nutritious than water for many, though given your current panic levels, you're not sure you'd be able to drink it without fear of over-fermentation or sudden supernatural intervention. A child carrying a small bundle of papyrus passes you, nearly bumping your shoulder. You step aside, attempting a graceful gesture that conveys, "No worries, all is well, go about your sacred tasks." The child raises an eyebrow, clearly amused, then scampers onward. You sigh. This is life here. Constant negotiation with strangers, animals, dust, and your own ineptitude. You approach a small marketplace where vendors sell figs, dates, onions, and small pottery vessels. People move confidently, selecting goods, exchanging coins or barter items, and navigating the tiny chaos with ease. You glance at a stand of onions and think, half humorously, about how these simple bulbs were essential to Egyptian diets. Historians still argue whether onions were valued for flavor, nutrition, ritual purposes, or all three simultaneously. But standing here amid their pungent aroma, you understand that they were non-negotiable essentials. You resist picking one up. First, because you're not supposed to touch without consent. Second, because your sense of smell is already on overdrive. Third, because your track record with basic coordination today has been spotty, and smashing an onion into a pile of grain could be catastrophic. From the corner of your eye, a man carries a tray of small clay jars filled with honey or oil. The weight shifts with every step, and he moves smoothly, expertly. You glance down at your own linen wrap, realizing it's twisted again, and for a moment, envy strikes. The villagers here are equipped not just with knowledge, but with a sort of effortless competence born of daily repetition. You're not. A small gust of wind kicks up sand at your feet, prompting a few nearby children to squeal and scatter. You inhale sharply, wiping grit from your eyes, and make a mental note, you might need a better scarf, or a helmet, or possibly a tent with a zip-up door. As you continue, you notice a modest shrine tucked against a wall.
Small offerings of bread, flowers, and incense sit neatly arranged. A cat lounges nearby, its tail flicking lazily. You crouch slightly, taking in the scene, and remind yourself of a light joke. If cats had been in charge of ancient religious life, they would have demanded worship directly and probably executed anyone who ignored nap schedules. You chuckle quietly to yourself, careful not to disturb the serenity.
A man near the shrine waves at you, holding a small cup of water. You accept it gratefully, sipping slowly. The cool liquid is a relief, though you wince at the taste of sediment. A mainstream fact reminder. Even clean water from wells or the river often contained fine sand or minerals. You swish it around in your mouth like a makeshift mouthwash, silently thanking your ancestors for modern plumbing.
Nearby, a small group of women is weaving baskets. You watch their hands move in fluid, practiced motions, the reeds intertwining with a precision you can't hope to replicate. A quirky tidbit floats to the surface of your mind. Some baskets were designed so cleverly that they could hold water temporarily without leaking. Ingenious. And yet, you doubt you could even fold a single reed correctly without creating a tragic, unintentional trap.
You meander further, navigating the tight alleys that snake through the village. The midday sun climbs higher, and the heat begins to stick to your linen like a second skin. Sweat drips along your back, your sandals scuff against pebbles, and every motion seems to demand more effort than it should. You glance at a passing group of workers and realize they are in their element. Every movement calculated, each gesture purposeful. You are a slightly panicked shadow, hoping no one notices you're floundering. You stop at a small well where a few villagers draw water using clay pots tied to ropes. You watch, fascinated by the simplicity and ingenuity. One person dips the pot, fills it, lifts it carefully, and pours it into a larger container. The weight and balance are second nature to them. You take a small step back, imagining yourself attempting this task and instantly ending up soaking in muddy water, holding nothing, your dignity floating downstream. Historians still argue whether these wells were primarily community resources or managed more privately, but you understand one thing clearly. Access to water is power, and observation alone is your safest strategy. Finally, you settle against the wall of a sun-baked home, taking a moment to breathe. The noise of daily life, children laughing, animals braying, merchants calling out their wares, blends into a surprisingly comforting rhythm. For all the danger, confusion, and grit, this is a functioning village. Life moves here in cycles and routines, and people thrive in a way you're still only beginning to comprehend.
You close your eyes briefly, letting the sun warm your face. A soft breeze carries the smell of fresh bread and earth. Despite the itch of sand in your clothes, the heaviness of the heat, and the general awareness that you wouldn't last long here without constant vigilance, you feel a faint thrill of accomplishment. You're still upright, still walking, still surviving, even if it's barely. You rise from the sun-baked wall, brushing sand and dust from your linen with exaggerated care, though it accomplishes little. The day has been long, and your muscles remind you that walking in loose sandals over uneven sand and stone is essentially a low-budget obstacle course designed by a civilization that clearly did not consider your comfort. Yet you trudge onward, drawn by the distant clatter of tools and the faint scent of cooking fires. There's something oddly magnetic about human activity, the way it hums with routine and life, even when it's exhausting to an outsider like yourself. You approach a small courtyard where a group of craftsmen is hard at work. The rhythmic tap of hammers striking chisels against stone echoes like a low drumbeat. You watch as one man smooths the surface of a limestone block, while another carves delicate hieroglyphs into its edge. The precision is hypnotic, almost meditative, and you can't help but be impressed. Mainstream historians note that stonemasonry was both highly technical and revered in Egyptian society. These artisans weren't just workers, they were preservers of culture.
And here you are, standing in sneakers centuries too early, wondering if they'd appreciate your lack of skill.
You try to make yourself appear busy, though what counts as busy in this situation is entirely unclear. A loose piece of cloth, some dust, a cautious glance toward the master craftsman, anything to signal that you're contributing rather than disrupting. A small joke pops into your head. In your own time, they'd probably rate this as enthusiastic incompetence. Here, though, it's likely just considered bizarre foreign behavior. One of the craftsmen pauses mid-chisel and glances at you. You quickly nod, smile faintly, and avert your gaze, hoping he interprets your gesture as either respectful acknowledgement or ritualized human gesture. He seems unconcerned and returns to his work. You breathe out in relief, grateful for small victories in a day otherwise dominated by micro-survival challenges. Nearby, a young apprentice sorts through a pile of colored stones, selecting one suitable for inlay work. His hands move with precise efficiency, almost dancing across the pile, picking, discarding, adjusting. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. Egyptians often used inlay in furniture, jewelry, and even statuary to represent symbolic meanings. Blue for the heavens, green for fertility, gold for divine perfection. You watch the boy for a while, marveling at his focus, and imagine trying the task yourself. Spoiler alert, you would immediately drop half the stones, creating a mini disaster in the name of art. The craftsman's rhythm carries you along, and you notice the smell of pitch and resin mixing with the dust. They're using it to seal joints, strengthen structures, or perhaps prepare decorative items for temples or wealthy patrons. You remember reading that the Egyptians had sophisticated woodworking techniques, often joining pieces with dowels and glue made from animal collagen. You admire the ingenuity while keeping a safe distance from the sharp tools. Your fingers have no intention of becoming another historical footnote. A scholar might debate whether artisans worked in organized guilds or more loosely, but watching these men, you can tell they operate with a strict hierarchy. Master, apprentice, helper, everyone knows their role. The rhythm of work is almost musical, punctuated by occasional verbal cues or gestures. You find yourself tapping your foot slightly, trying to match it without looking ridiculous. Ineffectively, of course, but the attempt feels like a tiny bond with the human flow around you. You wander a bit farther, noticing a smaller workshop adjacent to the stoneworkers. A man is grinding pigments on a flat stone slab, creating powders in bright reds, yellows, and blues. The sun catches the tiny particles, and for a brief moment, the colors sparkle in a way that seems almost magical. Egyptians used these pigments for tomb paintings, statues, and even on pottery. Historians still argue whether the colors held primarily symbolic or aesthetic significance. But standing here, you can almost feel the ancient intention, the human desire to make the ordinary radiant. You crouch slightly to observe a particularly bright blue pigment. It's made from ground lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone imported from far away. The effort required to produce even small amounts is staggering. You touch the stone gently, careful not to disturb the pile, and are reminded again of how physically demanding and painstaking daily life could be. A tiny joke surfaces. If you had to grind stones for a day, you'd probably demand overtime pay in modern currency, or at least a highly caffeinated beverage. A young girl enters the workshop carrying small clay pots filled with water. The craftsmen take a moment to rinse their tools, dip their brushes, and cool themselves. You realize that access to water, even in small amounts, is essential to every facet of life here, whether grinding pigments, sculpting stone, or kneading bread. You take a small sip from your own water skin, grateful for this minor modern luxury in your imagined life. Further down the courtyard, you see an area where reeds are being cut and bundled. Villagers handle them with deft care, preparing them for mats, baskets, or even roofing materials. A mainstream fact, reeds were used in nearly every aspect of Egyptian life, from everyday household items to ceremonial implements. Watching the precision, you understand why the locals view these materials with both practicality and respect. You shuffle closer, but a flick of a wrist from a passing worker reminds you to maintain distance.
You pause at the edge of the courtyard, taking in the scene. Pigments being ground, reeds bundled, and the constant hum of coordinated effort. Despite your outsider status, a faint sense of calm settles over you. You are witnessing a society that has mastered both its environment and its craft, a balance of discipline and creativity. And yet, your presence is still a constant reminder that you wouldn't survive long without guidance, vigilance, and an extraordinary tolerance for discomfort.
A gentle breeze carries a mix of dust and incense from a nearby shrine, blending with the smells of fresh-cut reeds and wet stone. You take a deep breath and try to memorize this sensory mosaic, the textures, colors, smells, and rhythms. It's a memory that feels precious because, in this world, every simple action is deeply connected to survival and purpose.
You glance back toward the main path and notice the sun beginning its slow descent. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard, and the activity is beginning to shift from midday labor to early evening routines. Children are called back to homes, small fires are stoked for dinner, and the intensity of work relaxes slightly. You take the cue, realizing that this might be a good time to move toward a quieter corner and prepare for the next challenge of your day. Despite minor setbacks, scratches from sand, and occasional awkwardness, you realize something important. You're adapting, slowly, clumsily, but unmistakably. Every step, every glance, every cautious interaction teaches you about this civilization's rhythm and logic. For someone who likely wouldn't last a day, the simple act of walking through the courtyard, observing, and not getting hurt feels like a small victory. With a careful glance around, you start making your way to a shaded alley at the courtyard's edge, eager for a moment of respite before evening approaches. The hum of life continues around you, a constant reminder that survival isn't just about avoiding crocodiles or sandstorms, it's about learning, noticing, and moving through the world with both respect and awareness. You slip into the narrow alley just beyond the craftsman's courtyard, grateful for the momentary shade it provides. The sun, now climbing higher in the late afternoon, casts long golden beams that filter through the mud brick walls, painting stripes across the dusty ground. You pause for a breath, letting your shoulders relax for just a moment. The alley smells faintly of herbs drying in woven baskets, mixed with the ever-present dust and the lingering aroma of bread from nearby ovens. Even in its simplicity, it's mesmerizing, a quiet, hidden corridor that feels like the heartbeat of the village. As you move slowly, careful not to trip over small rocks or stray clumps of clay, you notice a woman seated on a low stool weaving linen strips into mats. Her hands move with fluid precision, fingers nimble and sure, creating tight, intricate patterns with apparent ease. You kneel slightly to observe, feeling a pang of both admiration and envy. Mainstream historians note that weaving in ancient Egypt was both an art and a necessity, producing everything from household mats to clothing for the elite. Standing here, you can see why the technique was passed down through generations. It's a skill refined through practice, patience, and a deep understanding of material. You straighten up as a small child runs past, clutching a stick and shouting to a friend hidden behind a wall. The child's laughter carries down the alley, a light, airy sound that momentarily lifts the tension of your day. Quirky historical tidbit? Children in ancient Egypt often had chores, but they were also allowed long periods of playful exploration, and some scholars argue that this play contributed to developing skills needed for adult life, like hand-eye coordination or creative problem-solving. You watch as the children vanish around a corner, wondering how you'd fare in such unstructured yet physically demanding play. Probably poorly.
Further along, a man carries a bundle of freshly harvested onions on his shoulder, moving with surprising balance despite the awkward load. You step aside, careful not to obstruct him, and glance at the small market stall nearby. It's stocked with grains, dates, and pottery vessels brimming with water and oils. The sights, sounds, and smells all merge into a vibrant tapestry that contrasts sharply with the quietude of the temple you visited earlier. Historians still argue whether marketplaces were more controlled by local authorities or by communal agreements among vendors. But what's undeniable is the efficiency with which trade seems to flow in this small village.
A gentle gust of wind stirs the alley, sending a swirl of dust around your ankles. You bend slightly to brush it off, only to discover the stubborn grit has embedded itself along the folds of your linen wrap. One of your small jokes surfaces. This is starting to feel less like you wouldn't last a day and more like a you wouldn't survive a minute challenge. You laugh softly, careful not to draw attention.
Up ahead, the alley opens onto a small courtyard, centered around a communal water basin. Women draw water from it in clay jars, filling them to carry back home. Some scrub clothing along the stone edges, while children play nearby. You step closer, drawn by the rhythm of life and the opportunity to observe without interruption. The water glints in the afternoon sun, and a soft breeze carries its faint scent through the air.
You kneel near the edge to dip your hand in, careful not to interfere with anyone's work. The water is cool and surprisingly clean, refreshing after hours of heat, dust, and labor. A quirky historical tidbit occurs to you. Egyptians often used water not only for drinking and cleaning, but also for ritual purification, emphasizing its dual role in practicality and spirituality. You can see both aspects here, even in the simple act of washing clothes or quenching thirst.
Nearby, an elderly man is grinding grain with a hand quern. His movements are steady, precise, and surprisingly graceful for someone of his age. You watch him for a while, noting the rhythm. Lift, rotate, press, repeat. It's hypnotic, almost meditative. Mainstream historians often note that hand querns were a central part of domestic life, particularly for women. But you can see here that men also mastered the skill when needed. You imagine trying this yourself and shudder. Your arms would fail within minutes, leaving you covered in dust and crumbs, looking like a hapless character in a cautionary tale.
A small dog trots through the courtyard, its fur coated with dust, and sniffs around the water basin. You smile slightly, realizing animals are just as integrated into daily life as humans. The Egyptians had a deep appreciation for domestic animals, particularly dogs and cats, which were often treated with affection and respect. The dog pauses near your feet, giving you a skeptical look before wandering off, likely unimpressed by your lack of coordination. You notice the alley narrowing again as you continue, the walls rising higher and the shadows growing longer. Somewhere above, a woman hangs laundry across a line strung from one wall to another. You pause to watch the fluttering linen, sunlight catching it in golden tones. It's simple, everyday work, yet beautiful in its rhythm and repetition. Historians still argue whether domestic labor was undervalued or celebrated in daily Egyptian life, but from where you're standing, it seems both essential and quietly dignified. Your stomach rumbles as you continue, reminding you that you've been walking, observing, and avoiding hazards for hours. You spot a small stall selling bread and figs. The woman tending it smiles and offers you a nod. You return it with careful politeness, resisting the urge to ask how she manages to smile so serenely while the day continues its relentless pace. A tiny joke surfaces. If you attempted her multitasking skills, you'd likely topple every loaf, spill all the figs, and receive a chorus of tutting glances from villagers. You pause at a shaded corner, taking a deep breath. The air is still warm, but not oppressive, and the faint breeze carries scents of herbs, cooking fires, and the ever-present dust. Your limbs ache slightly.
Your linen wrap is still a little twisted, but for a moment, the alley feels like a safe haven, a narrow, sun-dappled passage through a bustling, ancient world.
A sudden squeal of delight draws your attention. Children are chasing a small goat, its hooves clattering across the courtyard. They are laughing, shouting, and weaving around adults going about their business. You watch them, realizing that play and work coexist seamlessly here, one flowing naturally into the other. A quirky historical fact drifts to your mind. Goats were common domestic animals in villages, valued for milk, meat, and even their hair, which could be woven into mats or ropes. The children's laughter reminds you that survival here wasn't only about enduring discomfort, it was about participating in a living, breathing community.
You move carefully, keeping your focus on the rhythm of life around you. The alley leads to a small open space where villagers gather in the late afternoon for socializing, bartering, and minor chores. You pause at the edge, observing, noting the flow of movement, the arrangement of baskets, and the subtle hierarchy of interactions. Even here, where tasks seem mundane, there is a complex web of relationships and customs, all of which you are hopelessly trying to decode in real time.
A bird calls from above, its song mingling with the hum of activity. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the village, the warmth of the sun, and the gentle bustle wash over you. Despite the challenges, the discomforts, and the ever-present awareness that you are an outsider who probably wouldn't last more than a day, there's a strange serenity in simply observing, in being present in this moment of ordinary life.
Finally, you continue along the alley, following its gentle curve toward the next cluster of homes. The late afternoon light casts long shadows across your path, highlighting the textures of mud brick, woven reeds, and the occasional stray object left behind by villagers. You take it all in, mentally cataloging details, appreciating the patience, ingenuity, and resilience that sustain this ancient world. And you realize that even if your survival here is tenuous, you are learning, observing, and absorbing more than you could have ever imagined.
The alley opens slowly into a wider space where the hum of village life is softened by the late afternoon light. You step carefully, mindful of uneven stones and stray clay shards, each one a potential reminder that you are a visitor, not a native. The village seems to breathe around you, the rhythm of labor and play blending into a gentle cadence that is almost hypnotic. For a moment, you allow yourself to relax into it, though the lingering awareness that survival here is precarious tugs at the edges of your calm. Ahead, you spot a small communal oven, its smoke curling lazily into the sky. A group of women tends the fire, turning loaves on flat stones and murmuring softly among themselves. You inhale deeply. The smell of baked bread is comforting, grounding, almost like a tether to the reality of sustenance in this sun-baked, dusty world. Mainstream historians note that baking bread in ancient Egypt was both a daily necessity and a highly skilled task, requiring careful timing, temperature control, and consistent kneading. You glance at the women's hands, moving rhythmically and confidently, and realize how much effort goes into a simple meal.
You linger at a respectful distance, observing a woman scraping the inside of her pot with a wooden spoon, extracting the last bits of dough. It's a minor gesture, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention, yet it speaks volumes about the resourcefulness necessary to thrive here. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. Some Egyptians would reuse dough scraps to make smaller loaves or feed animals, ensuring that nothing went to waste. You imagine yourself trying this back home and promptly dropping the dough in a dramatic display of incompetence.
The village hums with layered sounds, the clatter of pots, the distant bleating of goats, the laughter of children, the occasional call of a merchant advertising fresh produce. You follow the sounds, moving cautiously, realizing that each step carries the potential for both observation and misstep. Historians still argue whether the daily rhythms of villages were strictly regimented or more fluid, but what you're witnessing seems to combine both precision and improvisation. people negotiating space, labor, and social interaction with seamless efficiency.
Nearby, a man tends a small herd of ducks. They waddle through shallow puddles, quacking softly, their feathers glinting in the late sun. You pause, fascinated, noting the care with which he guides them, ensuring they don't stray too far or damage the surrounding crops. Domestic animals were integral to Egyptian villages, not merely as food sources, but as contributors to everyday life, from pest control to fertilization. A small joke flits through your mind. If ducks could judge human survival skills, you would be failing spectacularly.
A little further along, a woman carrying a woven basket of onions and garlic passes by. The weight on her head is impressive, her posture perfect, almost ritualistic in its precision. You marvel at the effortless way she balances it while stepping over scattered debris and interacting with passersby. Mainstream historians highlight that carrying goods on the head was a common Egyptian practice, allowing for efficient transportation over long distances while keeping hands free, a skill that clearly requires years to perfect. You try to mimic it with your own water skin, promptly spilling half of its contents and cursing your lack of coordination under your breath. The alley narrows again, shaded by overhanging latticework that filters sunlight in delicate patterns. A soft breeze carries the aroma of drying herbs, thyme, coriander, and a faint hint of lotus blossoms. You bend slightly to sniff a bundle, feeling a wave of calm. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces. Certain herbs weren't just culinary. They were also used in ritual purification and even for rudimentary medicinal purposes. Standing here, inhaling the fragrances, you sense how practical and spiritual needs often overlapped in this culture.
Children dart in and out of the shadows, their laughter echoing between walls. Some chase after a stray goat, others toss small pebbles into shallow puddles. Their energy is contagious, though you keep your distance, mindful that tripping over a child, or worse, a goat, would almost certainly be fatal to your dignity. You watch them for a few moments, realizing that play in this world isn't just leisure. It's training, adaptation, and social learning rolled into one. Historians still debate how much of Egyptian childhood was structured versus exploratory, but the fluidity you see here suggests both elements coexisted naturally.
The alley widens into a small open courtyard surrounded by modest homes. Smoke rises from tiny cooking fires, mingling with the scent of drying reeds and fresh-baked bread. Women chatter quietly while stirring clay pots. Children run barefoot across the ground, and a small dog sniffs through scraps near the edge of the courtyard. You step into the space cautiously, feeling the subtle shift in energy. The combination of domestic rhythm and communal interaction is both soothing and overwhelming. A man grinds grain with a hand core near the center of the courtyard, the repetitive motion creating a hypnotic, almost meditative rhythm. You watch the flour gather at his feet, imagining how essential this process is to daily life. Mainstream historical accounts emphasize that grinding grain was one of the most labor-intensive daily tasks, often performed by women, and required considerable physical effort and endurance. You consider trying it yourself, and quickly dismiss the idea, realizing that your arms would rebel within minutes. A bird flits overhead, calling sharply, and a small frog hops past your sandal. These minor movements anchor you in the reality of the village's ecosystem, reminding you that survival here isn't just about human interaction. It's a constant negotiation with animals, insects, and the landscape itself. A small joke crosses your mind. You now have a growing appreciation for the modern luxury of padded shoes and screens that keep frogs safely outside. You wander to the edge of the courtyard, where a low wall offers a view of distant fields and the glimmering Nile beyond. The late afternoon sun casts golden light across the land, highlighting the geometric precision of planted rows and the gentle curves of irrigation channels. You marvel at the skill required to maintain these fields, understanding that every crop, every patch of soil is a delicate balance of timing, effort, and environmental awareness. Historians still argue whether certain irrigation techniques were standardized across villages or adapted locally, but standing here, it's clear that practical knowledge was paramount. A gentle breeze carries the scent of the river, mingled with the aroma of cooking fires. You inhale slowly, letting the mixture of smells and sounds wash over you. Despite the discomforts, the dust, and the constant awareness that your survival instincts are being tested at every turn, you feel a small sense of accomplishment. You've navigated complex social spaces, observed skilled labor, and absorbed the rhythms of daily life in a way few outsiders ever could.
As the sun dips lower in the sky, you begin to follow the alley back toward the main path, noting how shadows lengthen and the village shifts subtly in tone. Children are called in, fires glow brighter, and the air cools just enough to offer relief. You realize that even in a civilization where every day is a test of skill, endurance, and adaptability, there is a gentle rhythm that carries people forward, a reassuring continuity that allows life to flow despite its inherent challenges. You pause, briefly, letting your gaze sweep across the courtyard and alley, committing the textures, smells, and subtle movements to memory. The village is alive, deliberate, and surprisingly nurturing in its own structured way. And while you are still very much an outsider, entirely unprepared for the realities of daily life in ancient Egypt, you also feel a quiet thrill. You're learning, adapting, and surviving a little longer with each step. You emerge from the alley into a larger street that runs closer to the Nile, the river's reflective shimmer beckoning in the distance. The air is warmer here, carrying the mingled aromas of water, mud, and faintly fermented grains. A gentle current flows nearby, and you pause for a moment, mesmerized by the way the sunlight catches on the water, scattering it like liquid gold. You realize how essential the river is to this world. It's not just a water source, it's a lifeline, a calendar, and a source of both sustenance and danger. You trudge forward, your sandals scuffing the compacted earth, acutely aware that even a brief misstep could land you in trouble, though not in the literal crocodile sense, hopefully. On the banks, fishermen are mending nets, their hands deftly weaving new fibers into frayed ropes. Mainstream historians highlight that fishing was a crucial supplement to Egyptian diets, providing protein and trade goods alike. You crouch slightly to observe, noting the skill involved. Each knot, each weave appears effortless, though you know that replicating even a fraction of it would result in chaos in your own hands. A quirky fact drifts into your mind. Some fishermen used specially trained birds, like cormorants, to help catch fish. The birds were tethered with a string around their necks so the catch could be retrieved. You glance nervously at a pelican squawking nearby, half expecting it to attempt such a maneuver on you. Further along, a boat glides silently along the river, oars dipping rhythmically into the water. You pause to watch, marveling at the Egyptians' mastery of simple yet efficient engineering. The boat rocks gently as it moves, carrying goods, clay jars, woven baskets, and perhaps even a small amount of grain. Historians still debate whether river transport was primarily controlled by individual households or overseen by local authorities, but the operation is seamless, giving the impression of centuries of perfected practice. Children play along the water's edge, tossing sticks into shallow pools and squealing when small fish dart away. You step carefully, trying not to disturb the delicate ecosystem. The sight is both enchanting and sobering. In this world, play and survival intermingle. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe children often learned vital survival skills through play, like balancing, swimming, and herding animals, all disguised as games. You watch a child stumble and laugh, realizing that even these playful moments are part of the broader fabric of village life. A man carries a bundle of reeds to the river, intended for building mats, baskets, or perhaps small boats. He moves with fluid ease, balancing the weight while avoiding loose stones and puddles.
Mainstream historians note that reeds were essential for construction, not just for domestic use, but also for ceremonial items and rivercraft. You shift slightly, trying to imagine yourself performing the task. Instantly, a small internal joke arises. You would either drop the bundle into the water or fashion it into something that looked vaguely like a cat, utterly useless.
On the bank, a woman kneads dough, shaping it into flat loaves before placing them into a clay oven nearby. You inhale the warm, yeasty scent, grateful for this sensory grounding after a day of mostly observation. You remind yourself that bread was central to Egyptian life, sometimes serving as currency, sustenance, and ritual offering, all at once. Historians still argue whether its primary value was nutritional, symbolic, or both. But the smell alone tells you it mattered, deeply and universally. You step back from the riverside bustle, letting your eyes roam across the shimmering water. A small boat passes, and the glinting sun reflects off clay jars stacked neatly in its hold. You note the coordination required for these transport tasks, every movement precise, every balance carefully maintained. Your imagination can't help but picture yourself in the boat, flailing arms, tumbling jars, and a chaotic splash worthy of a slapstick comedy. You chuckle softly, careful not to draw attention.
Near the riverbank, a scribe is seated under a makeshift canopy, his reed pens dancing across a papyrus scroll. He's recording trade details, inventory, or perhaps ritual offerings. Whatever it is, it demands focus. You watch in awe, appreciating the combination of literacy and numeracy, skills that gave individuals status and responsibility in this society. Quirky tidbit: some scribes were so highly respected that even minor mistakes could result in correction rituals, often performed publicly. You imagine what your performance would look like under such scrutiny and shiver at the thought.
Further along the path, vendors display baskets of figs, dates, and dried fish. The chatter of haggling reaches your ears, but you maintain distance, careful not to interrupt. The marketplace along the Nile is a hive of controlled chaos. Villagers negotiate, children fetch small purchases, and traders manage delicate exchanges of goods. Mainstream historians emphasize the economic importance of these markets, not just for sustenance, but for maintaining social networks, distributing resources, and reinforcing hierarchies. You wander quietly, mentally cataloging every movement, every exchange, understanding that even minor mistakes here could result in social friction.
A small dog trots past your feet, tail wagging lazily. It pauses to sniff at a basket of fish before wandering off, clearly unimpressed by your presence. You smile slightly. Animals in this world are everywhere: companions, work partners, or occasional nuisances. Their integration into daily life is subtle but constant. Historians still argue how domesticated animals influenced village structure, but watching this tiny drama unfold makes the debate tangible and vivid.
You pause at a shaded patch near the river, allowing the gentle hum of activity to wash over you. A breeze rustles the reeds and carries the mingled scents of water, fish, bread, and dust. You breathe deeply, letting your body absorb the rhythm and texture of life along the Nile. For a fleeting moment, you almost forget that your survival instincts are constantly on alert. The world seems vast, intricate, and alive. A delicate balance of human ingenuity, environmental understanding, and animal presence. A group of women approaches carrying large water jars balanced expertly on their heads. They walk with a precision born of practice, navigating obstacles without breaking stride. You step aside, admiring their skill and silently acknowledging how unprepared you would be for this daily endurance test. Mainstream historians note that carrying heavy loads on the head was a practical necessity and a mark of physical endurance, often taught from childhood. You imagine attempting it and promptly toppling everything, earning nothing but bemused stares. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the riverbank.
The water glints with gold and amber tones, and the villagers' movements soften slightly as work transitions toward evening tasks. You pause, letting the scene imprint in your mind. Children playing, merchants packing up, women carrying water, craftsmen finishing tasks, the scribe's quiet focus, all of it part of a living tapestry. Historians still debate the exact timing and organization of daily routines, but standing here, it feels as though every action flows seamlessly into the next, a rhythm refined over generations.
Finally, you step back from the river, your limbs slightly tired, your linen dusted with sand, and your mind brimming with observations. The Nile's gentle lapping and the surrounding village activity leave you both exhausted and strangely comforted. Despite the many challenges you've imagined and the overwhelming awareness that you wouldn't last long in this environment without constant vigilance, you are learning, absorbing, and, most importantly, still moving through this world.
You'll leave the riverbank behind, following a narrower path that winds back into the heart of the village. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows that stretch lazily across mud brick walls and worn stone pathways. The air has cooled slightly, carrying the subtle scent of cooking fires and drying reeds, mingled with the earthy tang of sand and river silt. You pause briefly, inhaling deeply, letting the layers of smells and sounds settle over you like a soft blanket. Even as the fatigue of the day tugs at your limbs, you feel a quiet satisfaction. You are still upright, still observing, still moving through a world that would easily overwhelm most outsiders.
Ahead, you notice a small courtyard where villagers have gathered around an assortment of tools and materials. Some are repairing baskets, others are sharpening knives or fashioning simple wooden implements. Mainstream historians note that this kind of multitasking was common. Villages were small and resources were shared, so people often combined work, socialization, and problem-solving in communal spaces. You move carefully, pretending to adjust your linen wrap, hoping to blend in. A small joke crosses your mind. Your version of blending in probably looks more like a mildly confused tourist than a practical participant. Nearby, a woman tends to a fire in a low clay hearth, stirring a pot of simmering stew. You pause to observe the technique. Slow, deliberate movements, balancing heat, timing, and ingredients. The smell is inviting, rich with onions, garlic, and a faint hint of cumin. A quirky historical tidbit drifts to your mind. Spices like cumin and coriander were not just culinary delights, but also used for medicinal purposes, believed to aid digestion or ward off minor illnesses. You imagine trying to cook something here and instantly turning it into a smoky disaster, leaving the villagers to wonder whether you are a magician or a menace. Children dart across the courtyard, some balancing small bundles of reeds, others chasing a scraggly goat. You step aside, careful not to trip over them or get in the way of their lively, structured chaos. Historians still argue how much freedom children had versus how much supervision dictated their daily lives. But here, it seems clear. Play is integrated into function, and learning occurs in motion, not just in instruction. You smile faintly, admiring the natural rhythm of activity, while silently thanking your modern upbringing for not requiring goat herding as part of basic education. A man kneels nearby, smoothing a clay vessel he has just formed on a low wheel. You watch as he runs his fingers along the curves, checking for imperfections. Mainstream historians emphasize that pottery was both utilitarian and ceremonial, and the skill involved required years of practice. A quirky fact surfaces. Some pots were deliberately imperfect in shape or texture, as certain symbolic beliefs held that slight irregularities could ward off malevolent spirits. You try not to imagine creating one of these yourself. Your track record suggests it would lean more toward chaos than charm. You wander closer to a small garden tucked into a corner, where herbs and vegetables grow in neat rows. The scent of mint and coriander is strong, mingling with the faint aroma of wet soil.
Women and children are harvesting carefully, selecting the ripest produce while leaving others to mature. You pause to observe, understanding that this practice reflects both careful planning and intimate knowledge of the land. Historians still debate the degree to which gardens were for subsistence versus leisure or ritual, but standing here, it seems to be a combination of all three. A gentle breeze carries the laughter of children chasing each other around the courtyard. You watch as one trips over a loose stone, scrambles to recover, and continues the game without missing a beat. It's a minor moment, but it strikes you how seamlessly resilience is woven into daily life. The balance of play, work, and observation is effortless for them. Yet for you, each interaction feels like navigating a labyrinth with invisible rules. A tiny joke surfaces. You would probably be disqualified from childhood games on the first step. Further along, a group of women sits under the shade of a low wall, spinning fibers into thread. Their hands move in practiced harmony, twisting fibers, rolling spools, and occasionally exchanging soft words or laughter. Mainstream historians highlight spinning as a central domestic task, essential for clothing production and often taught from girlhood. You try to imagine the skill required to maintain this rhythm for hours at a time, and a faint shiver runs down your spine. The thought of creating even a single uniform thread without tangling or snapping seems impossible. Nearby, a small fire crackles as a man roasts fish over a low clay grill. The scent is sharp and appealing, a reminder that the river's bounty sustains much of village life. Quirky tidbit, some Egyptians flavored their fish with a mixture of herbs, oils, and honey, creating flavors surprisingly complex for a society often misrepresented as simple or primitive. You inhale deeply, appreciating the ingenuity and subtle artistry, while silently acknowledging that you would likely burn it beyond recognition. Children return with bundles of reeds, carefully placing them near storage piles, while adults nod in acknowledgement. The ease and precision of their actions impress you, a reminder that survival here is learned from the youngest ages. You imagine attempting these tasks, and a tiny joke forms. Even a single bundle would likely end up in the river or atop your head in a chaotic attempt at balance. You wander toward a quiet corner, where a cat lounges on a sun-warmed stone, eyes half closed. The feline stretches lazily, unbothered by your presence. Cats were deeply revered in ancient Egypt, often associated with protection and domestic well-being. You watch for a moment, feeling the calm presence of the animal, a counterpoint to the constant activity and small anxieties that have marked your day. The juxtaposition is comforting, a reminder that even amidst the bustle, there are moments of serene stillness. The courtyard slowly begins to quiet as evening approaches. Children are called in, merchants finish packing goods, and the last rays of sunlight streak across walls and pathways. The temperature softens, the dust settles, and the rhythmic flow of labor eases into the more measured cadence of evening. Historians still debate the exact timing of these transitions, but standing here, it feels intuitively right. Life winding down in preparation for night. You pause, breathing in the mingled scents of food, herbs, and warm stone. The village hums with a soft energy, a gentle reminder that survival is not just endurance, but observation, adaptation, and the quiet accumulation of knowledge. Despite the countless challenges, awkward interactions, and minor humiliations, you feel a faint sense of accomplishment. You have navigated the complex lattice of daily life, observed skill and ingenuity, and remained upright and alert. With a cautious glance, you make your way toward the edge of the courtyard, seeking a place to rest briefly before night fully descends. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows, and the air carries the faint hint of evening coolness. You take a deep breath, committing the textures, smells, and rhythms of this day to memory. Despite knowing you likely wouldn't last a full day unaided,
There is comfort in presence, in observation, and in the slow, steady absorption of a life so different, yet vividly alive. The village settles into evening. Shadows lengthen across mud brick walls, and the glow of small fires flickers through doorways. You walk slowly, your limbs tired but moving almost instinctively, absorbing the fading warmth of the day and the cooling promise of night. The hum of daily activity softens, replaced by quieter sounds, the crackle of hearths, distant voices, and the occasional call of a night bird. You pause for a moment, letting the transition from day to night wash over you, acknowledging how even a civilization so ancient and demanding has its gentle, predictable rhythms. You wander toward a low terrace overlooking the fields. The Nile glimmers faintly in the moonlight, reflecting silvery strands across its surface. Farmers are finishing the last of their irrigation work, adjusting small channels and checking crops, moving with the practiced ease of people intimately connected to the river's ebb and flow. Mainstream historians often note that evening routines were just as essential as daytime labor, with irrigation, feeding animals, and household chores requiring attention before night fully set in. You inhale deeply, the cool air carrying scents of wet earth, reeds, and the faint smokiness of cooking fires. It feels almost magical, this quiet interlude after a day so full of movement, learning, and minor calamities. A small group of villagers gathers near a communal hearth, sharing bread, figs, and the occasional roasted fish. The scene is intimate, warm, and comforting. You notice how each person knows their role: who stirs the pot, who passes the bread, who attends to children or animals nearby. Historians still debate the social dynamics of communal meals, whether they were formal obligations, spontaneous gatherings, or ritualistic in nature. But watching it unfold now, it seems to be a natural, calming rhythm of village life. You realize that even here, in a world where survival is physically and mentally taxing, there are moments of shared calm and joy. You bend slightly, washing small clay pots near a basin, the water glinting in the firelight. You bend slightly, observing her methodical movements, the way her hands glide across the surfaces with care. A quirky historical tidbit occurs to you. Egyptians often used specific cleansing rituals not just for hygiene, but as spiritual preparation for the next day, believing that clean objects and spaces attracted divine favor. You smile faintly, imagining your own modern rituals, perhaps microwaving a coffee mug, falling somewhere between sacred and absurd. Children play quietly near a low wall, tossing pebbles into shallow pools. Their laughter is softer now, almost meditative, blending into the ambient sounds of the evening. You watch, noticing how play, observation, and learning interweave seamlessly. Mainstream historians emphasize that children's games in ancient Egypt often doubled as training for adult responsibilities, balancing, herding, and observing social interactions. Watching them, you appreciate how survival skills were embedded in everyday life from the earliest ages. A cat stretches lazily on a stone ledge, its eyes half closed in the glow of the fires. Cats were highly regarded in this society, both for practical purposes, controlling rodents, and symbolic ones, associated with protection and domestic well-being. You take a quiet moment to watch its fluid movements, feeling the calm presence of a creature wholly at ease in its environment. Quirky historical tidbit: Egyptians often believed cats could sense approaching danger, their behavior influencing domestic routines and even ritual decisions. You chuckle softly, imagining a cat silently judging your lack of grace earlier in the day. You continue down a narrow path, leading back to the central courtyard. The shadows stretch long, and the day's warmth is replaced by the gentle coolness of night. The village seems to exhale, a subtle shift from the urgency of work to the slower cadence of evening. Historians still debate the exact timing of nighttime routines, but standing here, it seems intuitive. Life slows,
tasks conclude, and the day is stored in memory rather than motion.
A faint breeze carries the scent of lotus blossoms and baked bread. You pause, closing your eyes for a moment, letting the sensory tapestry of the village, the smells, sounds, and gentle flicker of firelight wash over you. You feel the dust of the day on your skin, the fatigue in your muscles, and the quiet thrill of having navigated, however clumsily, this ancient world. Despite knowing that surviving a full day without guidance would be nearly impossible, you sense a small pride. You've observed, adapted, and remained present. Near the riverbank, a fisherman untangles his nets, preparing them for the next day's labor. The water is calm, reflecting the soft glow of moonlight. You step back slightly, observing the patient, rhythmic motions that have likely been repeated for decades, if not generations. Mainstream historians note that tasks like these required precision, attention to detail, and an intimate understanding of both human and environmental factors. You marvel at the knowledge embedded in such seemingly simple acts, realizing that every movement in this world is a balance between skill, observation, and necessity. You make your way toward the edge of the village, where reeds and low grasses sway in the gentle night breeze. The distant sound of the Nile mingles with the occasional bark of a dog, the soft shuffle of humans settling into evening routines, and the subtle chirp of nocturnal insects. The atmosphere is both calming and grounding, a reminder that even in a demanding, unfamiliar world, there is harmony, continuity, and beauty. A small group of villagers gathers near a low wall to exchange news, gossip, and gentle laughter. Their voices are soft, intimate, carrying the warmth of shared human experience. Historians still argue about the extent to which informal communication influenced village cohesion, trade, or decision-making, but it is clear here that these small interactions are crucial threads in the fabric of life. You watch quietly, absorbing the ease of their movement, their gestures, and the rhythm of their speech. The final rays of sun disappear behind distant mud brick walls, leaving the village bathed in a soft silver-blue light. Fires glow brighter, casting long shadows that dance lazily across the ground. You pause for a final breath, taking in the mixture of sensory impressions: the warmth of the fire, the cool breeze, the lingering smells of cooking and earth, and the quiet, rhythmic hum of life settling into night. Quirky historical tidbit: some Egyptians believed that night was a time when spirits and protective forces were especially active, and households performed subtle rituals to honor these unseen presences. You smile, quietly imagining that you've been an unwitting participant in these ancient protective measures all day. As you settle onto a low stone ledge, legs tired but body still alert, you let your mind drift, letting the soft textures of the day dissolve into a calm, contemplative haze. The lessons of the day, adaptation, observation, and the sheer resilience required to navigate a world so different from your own linger gently. You feel the faint rhythm of the Nile in the distance, the subtle hum of village life, and the quiet assurance that, even in discomfort and uncertainty, moments of beauty, skill, and human ingenuity are everywhere, patiently waiting to be noticed. You close your eyes, drawing in one final breath of the evening air, and let the village, the river, and the gentle night carry you toward a restful, reflective calm. The dust of the day settles, your limbs soften, and the hum of life slows to a whisper. Even if you wouldn't last a day unaided, you've experienced, observed, and absorbed something rare: the intimate rhythm of a civilization alive in every small, precise, and beautiful gesture. Now, dim the lights in your own room. Feel the soft evening stretch over you, and let your thoughts drift, cradled by the textures, smells, and rhythms of an ancient Egyptian village. Tonight, you've walked alongside them, glimpsed their lives, and witnessed the quiet magic of survival in a world entirely unlike your own. The village grows quiet, the gentle murmur of distant voices fading into the soft pulse of night. You settle into a comfortable position, legs tired, body heavy but calm, and let the sensations of the day dissolve slowly. The sun has fully vanished, leaving a soft twilight glow and the reassuring presence of firelight from hearths flickering gently across walls. Every sound, the shuffle of footsteps, the distant call of a bird, the lapping of the Nile, is muted yet present, a soothing lullaby woven from the very fabric of life. In your mind's eye, the rhythmic motions of the villagers replay in slow motion. Women stirring pots, children chasing goats, craftsmen tapping chisels, and fishers untangling nets. Each action, precise and deliberate, is a gentle lesson in patience and presence. You feel your muscles relax further, your mind unwinding, as you drift alongside the day's narrative, absorbing the quiet artistry of ordinary tasks. Even the dust and heat, once so oppressive, now feel like part of the texture of life, grounding you in this ancient, mesmerizing world. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the cool night air settle around you. The soft hum of activity fade into calm. The river flows gently in your imagination, reflecting moonlight and carrying away tension. Your thoughts drift lazily, floating through the village streets, along the Nile, and among the quiet laughter and subtle rhythms of those who call this place home. You are present, you are calm, and you are entirely surrounded by the gentle heartbeat of life itself. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the sounds, smells, and textures linger just long enough to guide you toward rest. Tonight, you've glimpsed a world both foreign and familiar, a place where every movement, every breath, and every quiet gesture holds meaning. Allow this memory to fade softly, carrying you into peaceful sleep, cradled by the rhythm of an ancient Egyptian day. Sweet dreams.